Yatredam vrajayate vishwam vishwasmin avabhati yat tatvam brahma param jyotir akasham iva vistitam. My dear Lord, the impersonal Brahman spreads everywhere like the sunshine or the sky. And that impersonal Brahman, which spreads throughout the universe, and in which the entire universe is manifested, is you. In the Vedic literature, it is said that everything is Brahman and nothing else. The whole cosmic manifestation rests on the Brahman effulgence. The impersonalist, however, cannot understand how such a huge cosmic manifestation can rest on a person. Thus, this inconceivable power of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not understood by the impersonalists. Therefore, they are puzzled and always denying that the absolute truth is a person. This wrong impression is cleared by Lord Shiva himself, who says that the impersonal Brahman, which is spread all over the universe, is nothing but the Supreme Lord himself. Here it is clearly said that the Lord is spread everywhere, just like the sunshine, by virtue of his Brahman effulgence. Brahman feature. This example is very easy to understand. All the planetary systems are resting upon the sunshine. Yet the sunshine and the source of sunshine are aloof from the planetary manifestations. Similarly, the sky or the air is spread everywhere. Air is within the pot, but it also touches filthy places and sanctified places alike. In any case, the sky is uncontaminated. The sunshine also touches filthy places and sanctified places, and both are actually produced by the sun. But in any case, the sun is aloof from all the filthy things. Similarly, the Lord exists everywhere. There are pious things and impious things, but in the Shastras, the pious things are described as the front of the Supreme Lord, whereas the impious things are described as the back of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita 9.4, the Lord clearly says, Maya tatam idam sarvam jagatak vyakta murtinah matsthani sarva bhutani nachaham teshavavastitah. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. This verse of Bhagavad Gita explains that the Lord is spread everywhere by virtue of his Brahman feature. Everything rests in him, yet he is not there. The conclusion is without Bhakti Yoga, without rendering devotional service to the Lord, even an impersonalist cannot understand the Brahma Tattva, the Brahman feature. In the Vedanta Sutra, it is stated, Atahata Brahma Jigyasa. This means that the Brahman, Paramatma, or Parabrahman should be understood. Now, in Srimad Bhagwatam also, the absolute truth is described as the one without a second. But he is realized in three features: impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate issue. And in this verse, Lord Shiva confirms that ultimately the absolute truth is a person. He clearly says, Tattvam Brahma Param Jyotir Akasham Eva Vistritam. Here is a common example. A successful businessman may have many factories and offices, and everything rests on his order. If someone says that the entire business rests on such and such a person, it does not mean that the person is bearing all the factories and offices on his head. Rather, it is understood that by his brain or by his energetic expansion, the business is running without interruption. Similarly, it is the brain and energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that carry on the complete manifestation of the material and spiritual worlds. The philosophy of monism, explained here very clearly, adjusts itself to the fact that the supreme source of all energy is the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. This is described very clearly. It is also stated how the impersonal feature of Krishna can be understood. Rasoham apsu konte pravashmi sashishuraya pranava sarva vedeshu shabdakhe paurusham nishu. O son of Kunti, Arjuna, I am the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon, the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras, and I am the sound in ether and the ability in man. In this way, Krishna can be understood as the mystic power in everything. So Brahmajyoti is all pervading, and everything rests on the Brahmajyoti. And the Brahmajyoti is nothing but the Supreme Lord. And the Lord exists beyond Brahmajyoti, the Brahman effulgence. Srila Prabhupada is giving the example of the sun and the air. The sun enters, the sunshine enters everything, and is without everything also, beyond everything also. Similarly, the air enters everything, but the air is resting on the sky, and the sky and the air, Prabhupada is using it analogously. It's the same thing. The sky manifests as the air, but the sky is existing beyond everything as well. Beyond everything as well. In the same way, the Supreme Lord enters everything and is beyond it as well. So he enters everything as the impersonal Brahman. And Prabhupada is explaining for the impersonalist to understand the impersonal Brahman also requires the practice of bhakti, without which he cannot even understand the Brahman feature of the Lord. So, what to say of the Paramatma feature and the Bhagavan feature? And then Prabhupada is explaining how the impersonal feature or the vibhuti of the Lord is understood as the Lord explains in Bhagavad Gita, Rasoham apsu konteya, the mystic power in everything. the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. Hmm? The mystic power in everything is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's how we can understand the energy of the Lord. Prabhupada is explaining that the person who's owning many companies, he will not be putting all the companies and the affairs of the company on his head. He will be working through his different energies. And that is his intelligence here and his intelligence, that how he has structured the systematic working of the company. In the same way, the Lord is not personally manifest and present, or the Lord is not personally involved in working in everything, but the Lord is overseeing, and the Lord's energies are working everywhere. That's the point Prabhupada is explaining here. So Krishna is there in everything, and Krishna is beyond. And because Krishna is there in everything, everything in its true utility will give a pointer to Krishna. Everything in its real true flavor will give a pointer to Krishna. And that's why we see any aspect of the material world. If one realizes, if one sees it, probes it with a broad mind, one can get a pointer to Krishna. Everything is resting on the Supreme Lord. And the amazing aspect is that the Lord exists beyond. So whatever facilities exist in this material world, they are but an expansion of expansion or an extension of the Supreme Lord. And whatever limitations exist in this material world, all those limitations are fulfilled and met, are satisfied, because the Lord is beyond. So when one accesses the Supreme Lord beyond the limited material world, limited frameworks of material world, and there are no limitations, all those limitations are overcome. That's the point which we are learning here. Yo maya yedam pururupa yasrijan Bhivarti bhuya shapayati avikriya Yadveda buddhi sadivatma dusthaya Tvam tantram bhagavan pratimahi. My dear Lord, you have manifold energies, and these energies are manifested in manifold forms. With such energies, you have also created this cosmic manifestation, and although you maintain it as if it were permanent, you ultimately annihilate it. Although you are never disturbed by such changes or alterations, the living entities are disturbed by them. And therefore, they find the cosmic manifestation to be different or separated from you. My Lord, you are always independent, and I can clearly see this fact. It is clearly explained that Lord Krishna has multi energies, which can be grouped into three, namely the external energy, the internal energy, and the marginal energy. There are also different cosmic manifestations, namely the spiritual world and the material world, as well as different types of living entities. Some living entities are conditioned, and others are eternally free. The eternally free living entities are called Nitya Mukta, but they never come in contact with the material energy. However, some living entities are conditioned in this material world, and thus they think themselves separated from the Supreme Lord. Due to their contact with the material energy, their existence is always troublesome, being always in distress. The conditioned soul considers the material energy to be very much disturbing. This fact is explained by a Vaishnav Kavi or a poet. Krishna bhuli se jeevanadi bahirmukha अतएव माया तारे दे संसार सुख दुख दे संसार सुख दुख. When the living entity forgets the Supreme Lord and wants to enjoy himself independently, imitating the Supreme Lord, he is captured by the false notion that he is the enjoyer and is separated from the Supreme Lord. This material energy is therefore very much troublesome to the spiritual energy, the living entity, but the material energy is never troublesome to the Supreme Lord. Indeed, for the Supreme Lord, both material and spiritual energy are the same. In this verse, the Lord Shiva explains that the material energy is never troublesome to the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord is always independent. But because the living entities are not independent due to their false idea of becoming independently happy, the material energy is troublesome. Consequently, the material energy creates differentiation. Because the Mayavadi philosophers cannot understand this, they want to be relieved from the material energy. However, because a Vaishnava philosopher is in full knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he finds no disturbance even in the material energy. This is because he knows how to utilize the material energy for the service of the Lord. In the government, the criminal department and the civil department may appear different in the eyes of the citizens. But in the eyes of the government, both departments are the same and one and the same. The criminal department is troublesome to the criminal, but not for the obedient citizen. Similarly, this material energy is troublesome for the conditioned soul, but it has nothing to do with the liberated souls who are engaged in the service of the Lord. So, through the Purushavatar Mahavishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead created the whole cosmic manifestation. Simply by breathing out all the universes, the Lord creates and maintains the cosmic manifestation as Lord Vishnu. Then, as Sankarshana, he annihilates the whole cosmic manifestation. Yet, despite the creation, maintenance, and destruction of the cosmos, the Lord is not affected. The various activities of the Lord must be very disturbing to the tiny living entities. But since the Lord is supremely great, he is not affected. Lord Shiva or any other pure devotee can see this clearly without being blinded by Bheda Buddhi or differentiation. For a devotee, the Lord is the supreme spirit soul, since he is supremely powerful. His various powers are also spiritual. For a devotee, there is nothing material. For material existence only means forgetfulness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Prabhupada is explaining here how only the conditioned soul sees this differentiation, Veda Buddhi. Bheda Buddhi Prabhupada is talking about. Uh, so this differentiation begins, Prabhupada explains, from the point of view of feeling separation from the Lord or not being able to relate with the Supreme Lord. There is oneness when one is able to relate with the Supreme Lord in any situation. When this relationship is disturbed, then one feels, Prabhupada explains, that the feeling of being separate from the Lord incriminates one into this, uh, into greater and greater levels of disturbances owing to being drowned in this illusory material energy. That's the point. So the the original disturbance is the feeling of separation from the Supreme Lord, or feeling of being separate from the Supreme Lord. And this feeling of being separate from the Supreme Lord is the original disturbance, but it leads to a cascade of unending disturbances. Therefore, a conditioned soul is always disturbed because of the material energy, because he's attached to the material energy. He thinks himself to be the enjoyer of the material energy. So he tries to manipulate the material energy and he gets a box from the material energy. And therefore, he is supremely miserable. And therefore, he's completely disturbed. The Lord is independent of the material energy. The Lord is not affected by the material energy. And therefore, a devotee who is sincerely taking shelter of the Lord, even such a devotee is not affected or agitated by the material energy. So material energy is out of our control. But the problem is material energy agitates us. And when one becomes agitated, then one tries to run behind the material energy in an attempt to manipulate the material energy, which becomes difficult. And that leads to unending complex disturbances, an unending complexity of disturbances, which is being talked about here so beautifully. But there is no disturbance for the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada gives the example of the state has two departments, civil department and criminal department. So the criminal department for the government, both the departments are the same. So for Krishna, the material energy, spiritual energy is the same. But for the living entities, the material energy is the prison ministry. Just like for a criminal, the prison ministry is torturous for the criminal, not for a good citizen. In a similar way, the disturbances exist because of the criminal mentality of the heart. Once this criminal mentality is rectified, then there is no disturbance. Despite the various phases or facets which material energy will show. So, in spite of all that, there is no disturbance. That's a beautiful point which is being highlighted here. So it is said that actually the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord are like a stable shelter. So if you have a stable shelter, it is the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord which gives a stable shelter. So if there is a stability, then one is beyond the turbulence of the material world. The material world, so why is the material world turbulent? Why is there disturbance in the material world? The material world is turbulent because the material world is a false. The material world per se is not false. The material world is giving a false representation of reality. And because the material world is giving a false representation of reality, this representation itself is illusory because it's unreal. Because it's unreal, it's illusory. And therefore a person having any kind of perspective of life other than the Sarnagati to the Supreme Lord is tottering on an unstable platform which itself will not exist after some time because it's illusory. And because of that, there is so much of disturbance. So much so that the living in it is a perpetually disturbed species. Oh, it's such a disturbed species, actually. Therefore, therefore, actually, a sincere devotee understands the attempt to stabilize material grounds may not be a very healthy attempt. Best is to put all one's energy to stabilize the spiritual ground because the spiritual ground is actually going to last. And the material ground will not be there for a long time. So therefore, the Vedic Shastras uh, recommend that materially speaking, one should keep one's material life simple. Do the basic minimum and utilize the maximum amount of time for one's spiritual awakening because the spiritual platform is a stable platform. One is focusing on the spiritual reality of life, then one is going beyond the material disturbances. Whereas if one does not keep the spiritual focus in the forefront, then one will be sabotaged, destroyed, and pulverized by the material disturbances. That's what is going to happen. Just like Prabhupada says, okay, morning program every day, irrespective of what weather it is. No? If it is summer, you can wear half sleeves. If it is winter, you can wear a jacket. If it is even more cold, you can wear two. So, but morning program every day. Similarly, material situations, whatever face it they show. Our spiritual life, our offering to Krishna should be there in all the cases. That's a beautiful point which is being explained here. So one should not get allured by this false representation which this material world is giving us. But one should try to remain steadfast in his spiritual practices, understanding that to be the real fabric of life. Everything else is patchwork, is patchwork and extras. The real fabric of life is our offering of loving service to the Supreme Lord. That's the point. क्रियाकलापेरिदमेव योगिनः श्रद्धान्वितः साधु यजन्ति सिद्धये. Sorry. Bhutendriyanta karanopalakshitam Vede cha tantre cha ta eva kovida. My dear Lord, your universal form consists of all five elements: the senses, the mind, intelligence, false ego, which is material, and Paramatma, your partial expansion, who is the director of everything. Yogis other than the devotees, namely the Karma Yogi, the Jnana Yogi, worship you by their respective actions in their respective positions. It is stated both in the Vedas and in the Shastras that are corollaries of the Vedas, and indeed everywhere that it is only you who are to be worshipped. That is the expert version of all the Vedas. In the previous verse, Lord Shiva wanted to see the form of the Lord, which the devotees are always interested in. There are other forms of the Lord manifest in the material world, including Brahma and other demigods, and these are worshipped by materialistic persons. In the second canto, third chapter of Srimad Bhagwatam, it is stated that those who desire material benefits are recommended to worship different kinds of demigods. And in conclusion, the Bhagavatam recommends Akama Sarva Kamova Moksha Kama Udaradhi Tivrena Bhakti Yogena Yajeta Purusham Param. This is 2, 3, 10. The devotees, the Gyanis who are known as Moksha Kama, and the Karmis who are known as Sarva Kama are all aspiring to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu. Even when one performs yagyas, as stated here, Kriya Kalapa, it should always remember that the demigods are but agents of the Supreme Lord. Actually, the worshipable Lord is Vishnu, Yageshwara. And even when different demigods are worshipped, in the Vedic and Tantric sacrifices, the actual goal of sacrifice is Lord Vishnu. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita 9:23, it is said, Ye piyanya devata bhaktya yajanti shraddhayanvitaha tepi mameva konteya yajanti yavidhi purvakam. Whatever a man may sacrifice to the other gods, O son of Kunti, is really meant for me alone, but is offered without true understanding. Thus, the worshippers of the various demigods also worship the Supreme God, but they do so against the regulative principles. The purpose of the regulative principles is to satisfy Lord Vishnu. In the Vishnu Puran, the very same thing is confirmed in 3.8.9, 3.8.9. Varnashrama Charavata Purushena Para Puna Puman Vishnu Raradhyate Pantha Nanyat Tat Kosha Karanam. Here it is clearly mentioned that a karmi, jnani, or yogi, in fact, everyone worships Lord Vishnu if he is actually expert in the knowledge of the Vedas and the Tantras. The word Kovidaha is very significant, for it indicates the devotees of the Lord. Only the devotees know perfectly that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, is all pervading. Within the material energy, he is represented by the 5 material elements, as well as the mind, intelligence, and ego. He is also represented by another energy, the living entities, and all these manifestations in the spiritual and the material world combined are but representations of the different energies of the Lord. The same conclusion is that the Lord is one and that he is expanded in everything. This is understood by the Vedic version, Sarvakhalam Sarvakhalaf idam Brahma. One who knows this concentrates all his energy in worshipping Lord Vishnu. Srila Prabhupada explains here that in everything, it is the Supreme Lord which is to be worshipped. So it is all right to start at various ends. Like, say, for example, the demigod worship is explained here. It's all right to start from the point of demigod worship. But then the purpose of demigod worship is fulfilled when one understands that the personality empowering the demigods is the Supreme Lord. And ultimately, indirectly, one is worshipping the Supreme Lord.